My brother crashed my new truck, and my parents want me to apologize to him. The cop's voice on the phone was professional but strained, the kind of tone that meant he'd delivered bad news before and knew exactly how people would react. Mr. Holloway, this is Officer James Kowalski with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about your vehicle, a 2024 Ford F-150, license plate GHX2891. There's been an accident. My stomach dropped so fast I actually felt dizzy. I'd owned that truck for exactly 19 days. 19 days of keeping it pristine, parking it far from other cars, hand-washing it every Sunday morning like it was made of glass. How bad? My voice came out hoarse. The vehicle is totaled, sir. Driver's being transported to County General with injuries. We're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. I almost asked who was driving before my brain caught up. The truck was registered to me. There was only one spare key, hanging on a hook in my apartment, and I'd driven my older Jeep to work that morning. Only one person had access to my apartment. My younger brother, Garrett. I'd been working construction for 6 years, pulling doubles and taking every overtime shift available to save enough for that truck. Not just any truck, but the exact model I'd wanted since high school. A Ford F-150 XLT in metallic blue with the extended cab and towing package. I'd put down $8,200 in cash, nearly wiping out my savings, because I wanted to keep the monthly payments manageable at $485. I'd spent hours at the dealership with the finance manager, a patient woman named Carol, who'd helped me navigate the paperwork and get a decent interest rate despite my modest credit score. When I'd finally driven it off the lot 3 weeks ago, I'd called my best friend, Austin, and my voice had actually cracked with emotion. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was proof that I'd made something of myself, that the kid who'd barely graduated high school and spent his early 20s doing grunt work had actually built a real life. My apartment was small but mine, my job was steady with good benefits. And now I had a truck that would last me the next decade or more. Everything felt like it was finally coming together. Garrett had always been different from me. 5 years younger at 23, he'd coasted through life on charm and our parents' support, dropping out of college after one semester and bouncing between jobs that never seemed to stick. He'd lived with our parents for the past 2 years, paying minimal rent and spending most of his money on video games, bar tabs, and an endless rotation of girlfriends who all seemed to leave him within a month or two. I'd let him crash on my couch 3 months ago when he'd gotten into a fight with our dad about his lack of direction, and what was supposed to be a weekend had turned into 6 weeks before I'd finally told him he needed to find his own place. He'd acted like I'd betrayed him, complaining to our parents that I was being unreasonable and selfish. Our mother, Diane, had called me twice trying to convince me to let him stay longer. He's your brother, Lucas. He's going through a rough patch. Family helps family. I'd held firm, though it had cost me 3 weeks of cold silence from my parents. Garrett had moved back home, and things had been tense between us ever since. I drove to the hospital first, my hands gripping the Jeep's steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. County General was a sprawling complex on the east side of town, all beige concrete and tinted windows. I'd been there once before when Austin had broken his arm on a job site, and I remembered the antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting that made everything feel surreal. The emergency room was moderately busy for a Thursday afternoon, filled with people in various states of distress. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, directed me to the waiting area after I explained why I was there. Your brother's in exam room 4. Doctor's with him now. Someone will update you shortly. I sat in an orange plastic chair that was bolted to the floor and stared at the motivational poster on the opposite wall, something about courage and perseverance that felt obscenely inappropriate given my current emotional state. 27 minutes passed before a doctor emerged, a lanky man in his 40s with graying hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen every possible variation of human stupidity. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Mr. Holloway, I'm Dr. Stephen Reeves. Your brother's stable, but he's got some significant injuries we're monitoring. Broken collarbone, fractured ribs, severe concussion, lacerations to his face and arms. He was conscious when the paramedics arrived, but disoriented. We're keeping him overnight for observation due to the head injury. I nodded, trying to process the information. Can I see him, Doctor? Reeves hesitated, glancing at his tablet. The police want to speak with him first. Officer Kowalski is in there now getting a statement. You can wait, but it might be a while. Something in his tone made me ask, was he drinking? The doctor's expression didn't change, but his eyes told me everything I needed to know. That's between your brother and law enforcement. I can tell you his blood alcohol level will be part of the medical record that gets shared with the investigating officers. Beyond that, I can't comment. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight, I thought I might throw up right there in the emergency room waiting area. Garrett had been drunk. He'd taken my truck without permission, gotten drunk, and totaled it. And now I was supposed to feel sorry for him because he'd hurt himself in the process. Officer Kowalski found me in the waiting room 40 minutes later. He was maybe 50, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of dealing with humanity's worst decisions, and he carried a leather notebook that looked like it had been through a war. Mr. Holloway, I'm the one who called you. Can we talk somewhere private? We found an empty consultation room. one of those small spaces with a round table and 4 chairs that hospitals used for delivering bad news to families. Kowalski sat across from me and opened his notebook, clicking his pen with a practiced motion. Your brother claims he had permission to use your vehicle. Is that accurate? No, absolutely not. I didn't even know he'd been in my apartment. Kowalski made a note. He says you told him he could borrow the truck anytime he needed it, that you two had an understanding. He says the keys were left out for him. I felt my face flush with anger. That's a lie. The spare key hangs on a hook in my kitchen with my other keys. I never told him he could use my truck. I never even offered. Why would I? He doesn't have his own insurance and his driving record is terrible. He totaled his last car 2 years ago. Do you have any documentation of that? Text messages, emails, anything showing you explicitly told him not to use the vehicle? I thought about it and realized with growing horror that I didn't. I'd never thought I needed to tell my own brother not to steal my truck. No, I didn't think I needed written documentation to establish that my truck, registered in my name, with keys in my apartment, wasn't available for him to take whenever he felt like it. Kowalski nodded sympathetically. I understand your frustration, Mr. Holloway, but from a legal standpoint, this gets complicated. Your brother had access to your residence and the keys. He claims verbal permission. Without evidence to the contrary, this might be treated as a civil matter rather than theft. He was drunk. You can't tell me that doesn't matter. His blood alcohol level was 0.12, well above the legal limit. We'll be citing him for DUI, and those charges will move forward regardless of the vehicle ownership question. But the DUI doesn't automatically prove he took the truck without permission. I stared at the officer, trying to understand how any of this made sense. So my brother steals my truck, gets drunk, crashes it, and because he's a good liar, there might not be consequences? I'm not saying there won't be consequences. I'm saying the theft charge is going to be difficult to prove given the circumstances. Your insurance will likely cover the vehicle damage minus your deductible, and the DUI will result in fines, possible jail time, and license suspension. But whether he faces additional charges for unauthorized use of a vehicle depends on evidence we don't currently have. Kowalski leaned back in his chair, studying me. My advice? Document everything from this point forward. Get a statement from your apartment management about who has keys. Check if you have any texts or emails where you discussed vehicle access. Talk to your insurance company and be completely honest about the situation, and consider whether you want to pursue this criminally or handle it as a family matter. Family matter. Like Garrett stealing and totaling my truck was the same as arguing over who got the last piece of pie at Thanksgiving. I thanked the officer and left the hospital without seeing Garrett. I couldn't trust myself to be in the same room with him without saying something I'd regret, and I needed to see the damage to my truck before I completely lost my mind. The impound lot was on the industrial side of town, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A board attendant in a glass booth checked my ID and directed me to space B23. I walked through rows of damaged vehicles, each one representing someone's bad day, until I found mine. I'd been prepared for it to be bad. Totaled meant totaled. But seeing it in person made my chest constrict so painfully I actually gasped. The entire front end was crumpled like aluminum foil, the hood bent upward at an impossible angle. The driver's side door was caved in, the windows shattered, the airbags deployed and hanging limply from the steering wheel and dashboard. Broken glass glittered across the ground like diamonds, and there was a dark stain on the driver's seat that I realized with horror was probably Garrett's blood. I walked around the truck slowly, documenting everything with my phone's camera. The rear bed was damaged too, scraped along one side with deep gouges in the paint. The tailgate was hanging by one hinge. The passenger side mirror was completely gone, torn off in the impact. I'd made 3 payments on this truck, 3 payments of $485 each, plus insurance, plus gas. I'd driven it exactly 19 days, and now it looked like something from a junkyard. I sat on the bumper of someone else's wrecked sedan and called my insurance company. The automated system eventually connected me to a claims adjuster named Patricia Thornton, who had the kind of patient, measured voice that suggested she'd heard every crazy story imaginable. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. My brother had taken my truck without permission, crashed it while drunk, and was now claiming I'd given him verbal permission to use it. Patricia was quiet for a moment after I finished. Okay, Mr. Holloway, I need to be straight with you about how this is going to work. Because your brother had access to your vehicle and is claiming permission, this claim gets complicated. If we determine he had implied permission to use the vehicle, your insurance will cover the damage minus your deductible, which according to your policy is $1,000. However, we'll also have to consider whether to raise your rates due to the DUI crash, even though you weren't driving. How is that fair? I didn't give him permission. I wasn't even there. I understand, and I'm not saying it's fair. I'm telling you how insurance companies assess risk. A vehicle registered to you was involved in a DUI accident. That's a risk factor regardless of who was behind the wheel. Now, if you can prove unauthorized use, that changes things. We'd pursue subrogation against your brother for the full cost of the vehicle, and your rates wouldn't be affected. But you'd need to file a police report for theft and have your brother charged. The police say it's hard to prove theft when he had access to my apartment and the keys. Patricia sighed. Then we're likely looking at a standard collision claim. I'll send an appraiser to look at the vehicle, but from your description, it's almost certainly a total loss. We'll pay out the actual cash value of the vehicle, minus your deductible, minus whatever you still owe on the loan. That payout goes to your lender first to satisfy the loan, and anything left over comes to you. I did some quick mental math that made me want to vomit. The truck had cost $36,800. I'd put down $8,200 and financed $28,600. I'd made 3 payments of $485, so I still owed roughly $27,500. A 3-week-old truck in perfect condition might have an actual cash value close to what I paid, but insurance companies didn't pay what you paid. They paid market value, which factored in depreciation the second I drove it off the lot. If I was lucky, they'd value it at $33,000. Minus my $1,000 deductible meant $32,000. Pay off the $27,500 loan, and I'd walk away with $4,500. Less than what I'd put down originally. 5 months of overtime and careful saving, gone. And I still wouldn't have a truck. How long does the process take? I asked Patricia, my voice hollow. Appraisal within 3 to 5 business days. Payout within 2 weeks after that, assuming no complications. I'm sorry, Mr. Holloway. I know this isn't the outcome you wanted. I thanked her and ended the call, then sat in my Jeep in the impound lot parking area and tried not to cry. I was 28 years old, and I felt like a teenager again, helpless and angry and completely out of control. My phone rang an hour later while I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the empty hook where the spare truck key used to hang. My mother. I almost didn't answer, but avoiding her would only make things worse. Lucas, honey, are you okay? The hospital called us about Garrett. We're here with him now. Her voice had that particular tremor that meant she'd been crying, and I felt a spike of resentment that she was crying over Garrett when he'd been the one who'd caused all this. I'm fine, Mom. How's Garrett? He's in a lot of pain, sweetheart. Broken bones, concussion. They're keeping him overnight. The doctor says he's lucky to be alive. The truck rolled twice before hitting a tree. If he hadn't been wearing his seatbelt, her voice broke, and I heard my father murmuring something in the background. Lucas, he told us what happened. He said you two had an argument and you told him to take the truck and leave. Is that true? My brain short-circuited for a moment as I processed what she'd just said. What? No. Mom, that's not even remotely true. I didn't see Garrett today. I didn't talk to him. I didn't know he'd taken my truck until the police called me. That's not what he said. He said you were angry about him leaving dishes in your sink when he stayed over last week, and you told him to take the truck and get out of your life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Last week Garrett hadn't been at my apartment. I hadn't seen him in 3 weeks, not since our parents' anniversary dinner where we'd barely spoken. Mom, he's lying. He stole my truck. He was drunk. The police tested his blood alcohol level. This isn't me being angry over dishes. This is Garrett taking something that didn't belong to him and destroying it. My mother's voice turned cold. Lucas Anthony Holloway, your brother is lying in a hospital bed with broken bones, and you're accusing him of being a thief and a liar? He made a mistake. Yes, he shouldn't have been drinking, but you shouldn't have given him the keys when you were angry. I didn't give him the keys. I wasn't even home. He broke into my apartment and took them. He has a key to your apartment, Lucas. You gave it to him when he was staying with you. That's not breaking in. A key for emergencies, not for coming and going whenever he wants, and definitely not for stealing my truck. My father's voice came on the line, gruff and tired. Lucas, your mother's upset. We're all upset. Garrett screwed up. We get that. But he's family, and he's hurt. Can you maybe dial back the anger for 5 minutes and show some concern for your brother? My concern for my brother ended when he totaled the truck I worked 6 months to afford. The truck I've had for less than 3 weeks. The truck I now owe more on than it's worth because insurance doesn't cover full replacement value on brand new vehicles. It's just a truck, son. It's replaceable. Your brother isn't. I hung up. I actually hung up on my father, something I'd never done in my entire life. But I couldn't listen to one more second of them defending Garrett's indefensible behavior. My phone immediately started ringing again, and I silenced it, watching the screen light up with call after call from my parents. Finally, a text message from my mother appeared. We need to talk about this like adults. Come to the hospital, please. I didn't go to the hospital. Instead, I called Austin, who picked up on the first ring. Dude, I heard about your truck. I'm so sorry, man. Word traveled fast in our circle. We all worked construction, knew the same people, drank at the same bars. Someone from the sheriff's department had probably mentioned it to someone else, and now everyone knew. It's worse than you heard, I said, and then I told him everything. The theft, the lies, my parents' reaction, the insurance nightmare. Austin listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your family's messed up, brother. You know that, right? Like, objectively, the way they're treating you is not okay. I know. I just don't know what to do about it. What do you want to do? I thought about it. What did I want? I wanted my truck back, undamaged, in my driveway. I wanted Garrett to face real consequences instead of getting bailed out by our parents like always. I wanted my family to acknowledge that what had happened to me mattered, that my loss and anger were valid. But most of all, I wanted to stop feeling like the bad guy for being angry that my brother had stolen and destroyed something I'd worked so hard for. I want him charged with theft. I want to sue him for the difference between what insurance pays out and what I actually lost. And I want my parents to stop acting like I'm the problem. Austin whistled low. That's going to burn some bridges, man. You ready for that? I don't think I have a choice. If I let this go, they'll know they can do whatever they want to me, and I'll just take it. I'm done being the family doormat. The next morning, I went back to the police station and asked to speak with Officer Kowalski. He met me in the same kind of consultation room we'd used before, and I could tell from his expression that he'd been expecting me. I want to press charges for theft, I said before he could even sit down. I wanted on record that my brother did not have permission to use my vehicle, and I want him prosecuted. Kowalski nodded slowly. Okay, before we do that, I need to tell you what you're looking at. Your brother's already facing DUI charges. If we add theft of a vehicle, that's a separate felony charge. Combined, he's looking at potential jail time, significant fines, and a criminal record that will follow him for life. Are you sure that's what you want? He's 23 years old. He's not a child. He made a choice to steal my truck and drive it drunk. Yes, I'm sure. What about your family? This is going to create a lot of tension. I met his eyes. My family already chose sides, and it wasn't mine. I'm protecting myself because no one else will. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Kowalski spent the next hour taking my detailed statement. Where the keys were kept, when I'd last seen them, my last communication with Garrett, the fact that I'd explicitly told him to find his own place months ago because he'd overstayed his welcome. I gave him my apartment manager's contact information to verify that Garrett's emergency key access had been rescinded 2 months ago when he moved out. I showed him text messages from our parents asking me to let Garrett stay longer, which proved there was family tension and contradicted Garrett's story about us having a friendly arrangement. This is good, Kowalski said, reviewing his notes. This establishes a pattern of behavior and contradicts his claim of permission. I'll submit this to the prosecutor's office. They'll make the final call on whether to file charges, but based on what you've given me, I think they will. How long does that take? Could be a few days, could be a week. Depends on their caseload. In the meantime, I'd recommend you minimize contact with your brother and your parents. Anything you say to them could potentially be used to contradict your statement. If they contact you, keep it short and factual. Don't get emotional, don't make threats, don't negotiate. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer. Attorney Michael Brennan had been recommended by a coworker whose divorce he'd handled, and his office was in one of those converted Victorian houses near downtown that lawyers seemed to love. He was maybe 45, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm demeanor that probably cost $300 an hour. It cost $250 actually, which he told me up front before we even started talking. I can give you a free consultation for 30 minutes, Brennan said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. After that, if you want to retain me, we'll discuss payment arrangements. Tell me what's going on. I went through the story again, and by now I'd told it so many times it came out almost mechanical. Brennan listened without taking notes, just watching me with that lawyer intensity that felt like being cross-examined. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Okay, here's the reality. You have a civil case against your brother for damages. The difference between what insurance pays out and your actual losses, that's quantifiable and you can sue for it. You'll probably win, especially if he's convicted on the theft charge. But collecting is another matter entirely. What do you mean? Your brother lives with your parents, has no steady income from what you've told me, and no assets. You can get a judgment, but a judgment is just a piece of paper saying he owes you money. If he doesn't have money, you can't get blood from a stone. You could garnish his wages if he gets a job, but that's a long-term proposition. And frankly, people like your brother often work under the table or stay unemployed to avoid garnishment. I felt my hopes deflating. So there's no point in suing? I didn't say that. There's value in establishing legal accountability even if you never collect a dime. The judgment follows him. It affects his credit. It creates a paper trail. And if your parents try to give him assets in the future, you might be able to place a lien on those. But if your goal is getting your money back quickly, that's probably not realistic. What should I do? Brennan looked at me seriously. What do you want to accomplish here? Justice? Money? Family reconciliation? You need to be clear about your goals because they might be mutually exclusive. I thought about it. What did I want? I want him to face consequences for once in his life, instead of my parents bailing him out. I want documentation that this happened, that he's responsible, that I didn't just let it go. And if there's any way to recover my losses, I want that too. Then we file a civil suit for damages, and we pursue it even if collection is unlikely. It'll cost you about $1,500 in legal fees to get through the initial filings and basic discovery. If it goes to trial, that number goes up. But even if we settle or he defaults, you'll have a judgment. That's worth something. I authorized him to proceed, signing a retainer agreement and writing a check for $500 to get started. Walking out of his office, I felt simultaneously empowered and exhausted. Every step I took to protect myself seemed to require money I didn't really have and energy I was running out of. That evening, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock and checked the peephole, seeing them standing in the hallway with identical expressions of parental determination. I almost didn't open the door, but I knew that would only delay the inevitable. Lucas, we need to talk. My father pushed past me into the apartment before I could respond, and my mother followed, her eyes red from crying. Dad, you can't just barge in here. We're your parents, Lucas. We'll barge wherever we need to if it means keeping this family together. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression I'd rarely seen before. Genuine anger. Do you have any idea what you've done? Garrett's facing felony charges because you decided to press charges for theft. Theft, Lucas. Against your own brother. He stole my truck. That's the literal definition of theft. My mother jumped in, her voice shaking. He made a mistake. He thought he had permission. You're destroying his life over a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Mom, he lied to the police about me giving him permission. He lied to you about us having an argument. He's lying about everything because that's what he does when he screws up. And you believe him every single time. We believe him because he's telling the truth. My mother was crying now, actually crying, and I felt that familiar guilt rising up that had controlled me my whole life. Lucas, please, drop the charges. Talk to the prosecutor. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. We'll pay for your truck. We'll make it right. Just don't do this to your brother. You can't afford to pay for my truck. And even if you could, why should you? Garrett destroyed it. Garrett should pay for it. My father stepped closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that meant he was truly furious. You're going to ruin his life over a truck? He could go to jail, Lucas. He could end up with a felony record. All because you're too stubborn and selfish to show a little grace. Grace? Dad? He stole my truck and totaled it while driving drunk. Where's the grace for me? Where's the acknowledgement that he violated my trust and destroyed something I worked half a year to afford? It's a truck. It's a thing. Your brother is family. I stared at my father, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time how this would always go. Garrett would always be the one who needed protecting, who needed grace, who needed the family to rally around him. And I would always be the one expected to sacrifice, to understand, to be the bigger person. No matter what Garrett did, no matter how badly he hurt me, I was supposed to just take it, because family. Get out, I said quietly. My mother gasped. Lucas, get out of my apartment, both of you. And don't come back unless you're ready to acknowledge that what Garrett did was wrong and that I have every right to be angry. My father's face turned red. You're choosing a truck over your family? No, Dad. You're choosing Garrett over me, like you always do, like you've done my entire life. I'm just finally calling it what it is. They left, my mother sobbing, my father slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood in my empty apartment, my hands shaking, and felt something break loose in my chest. Relief, maybe. Or grief. Possibly both. The prosecutor's office called me on Monday morning. Assistant District Attorney Lisa Chen. Wait, I can't use Chen. Let me use a different name. Assistant District Attorney Lisa Pacheco told me they were moving forward with charges against Garrett for theft of a vehicle and DUI. Based on the evidence Officer Kowalski gathered, we feel confident we can prove your brother took the vehicle without permission. The DUI charge is straightforward given his blood alcohol level. He's looking at a plea deal or trial. Either way, there will be consequences. What kind of consequences? For the DUI alone, he's looking at license suspension, fines of around $2,000, mandatory alcohol education classes, and possible jail time of up to 6 months, though first-time offenders often get probation. The theft charge adds potential prison time of 1 to 3 years, though again, a plea deal might reduce that. A lot depends on his willingness to accept responsibility. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction that was immediately undermined by a text from my mother. The prosecutor called Garrett. He's devastated. Please, Lucas, stop this before it's too late. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on the insurance appraisal. Patricia Thornton had sent an appraiser to the impound lot, and 3 days later, I received the official determination. Total loss, actual cash value of $32,400. Minus my $1,000 deductible, they'd pay out $31,400. After paying off my $27,500 loan, I'd receive $3,900. I'd lost my $8,200 down payment, 3 months of payments totaling $1,455, and now I was truckless with less than half my down payment to show for it. The math was devastating. I'd effectively lost $5,755 plus whatever increase in insurance premiums I'd face going forward. Attorney Brennan filed the civil suit 2 weeks later, suing Garrett for $5,755 in direct damages, plus court costs and legal fees. The lawsuit had to be served to Garrett personally, which meant a process server showing up at my parents' house and handing him papers in front of them. I wasn't there, but my mother called me immediately afterward, her voice so cold it could have frozen water. You're suing your own brother, your own flesh and blood. I didn't raise you to be this vindictive and cruel. You raised me to stand up for myself, Mom. That's what I'm doing. This isn't standing up for yourself. This is revenge. It's ugly and petty, and it's tearing this family apart. Garrett tore this family apart when he stole my truck. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. She hung up on me, and I added her to the growing list of family members who weren't speaking to me. The only person who still called regularly was my sister, Whitney, who lived 3 states away and had been mostly removed from the family drama until now. She called me on a Friday night while I was eating takeout Chinese food alone in my apartment, and her voice was careful, measured. Lucas, I heard about everything. Mom called me crying. Dad called me angry. Garrett sent me a long text about how you're ruining his life. I just want to hear your side before I form an opinion. I told her everything, start to finish, including details I'd left out with everyone else. How Garrett had always been the favorite. How our parents had paid for his college only to have him drop out. How they'd bought him a car that he'd totaled through reckless driving, then helped him buy another one. How every time he screwed up, they made excuses and bailed him out while expecting me to be understanding and supportive. Whitney was quiet for a long time after I finished. I didn't realize it was that bad. I mean, I knew they were easier on Garrett than they were on you, but I thought that was just normal youngest child stuff. It's not normal when the youngest child is 23 and still acting like consequences don't apply to him. No, you're right. It's not. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Garrett needs to learn that actions have consequences, and Mom and Dad aren't helping him by constantly protecting him from reality. Thank you. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. What are you going to do now? I looked around my apartment, at the empty spot where I used to keep my truck keys, at the photos on my wall from happier times when my family actually felt like a family. I'm going to see this through. The criminal charges, the civil suit, all of it. And then I'm going to figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I want with our parents going forward. The criminal case moved faster than I expected. Garrett's public defender reached out to the prosecutor about a plea deal, which told me he knew he couldn't win at trial. The evidence was too strong. My statement, the apartment manager's testimony about the key situation, the lack of any text messages or calls between Garrett and me on the day of the theft, and his blood alcohol level. Assistant D, a Pacheco, called to brief me on the proposed deal. Your brother is willing to plead guilty to both charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 2 months in county jail, 3 years probation, $3,500 in fines and restitution, mandatory alcohol treatment, and permanent license suspension. The restitution would be paid to you at a rate of $100 per month during his probation. That's only $3,600 over 3 years. I lost more than that. I understand, Mr. Holloway, but restitution in criminal cases is limited to what the defendant can reasonably pay. The civil suit is where you'd pursue full damages. This is about criminal accountability, not financial recovery. I asked if I had any say in whether they accepted the plea deal. You can provide a victim impact statement that will be considered during sentencing, but ultimately, the decision to accept a plea is up to the prosecutor's office and the court. We think this is a fair resolution given the circumstances. I agreed, reluctantly. 2 months in jail seemed light for stealing and totaling a $36,000 vehicle, but it was better than nothing. And watching Garrett actually face consequences would be its own kind of victory. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for early December, and I was told I could attend and read my victim impact statement in person if I wanted. I spent 2 weeks writing that statement, revising it over and over until it said exactly what I needed it to say. The hearing was in a small courtroom with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly green. My parents sat on one side of the gallery with Garrett's girlfriend of the month. I sat on the other side with Whitney, who'd flown in specifically to support me. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Dorothy Finch, who'd been on the bench for 18 years according to the bailiff. Garrett stood at the defendant's table in a suit I recognized as our father's, looking appropriately remorseful in that performative way he'd perfected over the years. When it was time for victim impact statements, Judge Finch called me forward. I walked to the podium on shaking legs, unfolded my printed statement, and read, Your Honor, on the evening of Thursday, October 12th, my brother Garrett stole my truck without my knowledge or permission. That truck represented 6 months of overtime work, careful saving, and financial sacrifice. I'd owned it for exactly 19 days when he took it, got drunk, and crashed it into a tree. The truck was totaled. My insurance paid out less than I'd invested in it, leaving me with a net loss of nearly $6,000. But the financial loss is only part of the story. My brother violated my trust and my home. He then lied to police about having my permission, lied to our parents about the circumstances, and showed no remorse until he was facing criminal charges. When I decided to press charges and sue him civilly, my parents accused me of being vindictive and cruel. They've chosen to protect my brother from the consequences of his actions rather than acknowledge the harm he caused me. This has fractured my family in ways that may never heal. I paused, my voice thick with emotion I hadn't expected to feel. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because my brother needs to understand that his actions have consequences. He's 23 years old. He's an adult. And adults who steal vehicles and drive drunk don't get to walk away with a slap on the wrist just because their family loves them. Thank you. I returned to my seat, and Whitney squeezed my hand. My mother was crying silently, and my father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Garrett's attorney stood and gave a brief statement about Garrett's remorse and his commitment to change, which felt hollow, given everything. Judge Finch reviewed the plea agreement, asked Garrett if he understood and accepted it, and sentenced him according to its terms. 2 months in county jail starting immediately, 3 years probation, $3,500 in fines and restitution, alcohol treatment, license suspension. Garrett was led away by a bailiff, and my mother collapsed into sobs. My father put his arm around her, but looked at me with such hatred, it made my chest hurt. Whitney and I left through a side door to avoid them. That took courage, Whitney said as we walked to her rental car. Reading that statement in front of them. How do you feel? Empty, I said honestly. Like I won, but I lost at the same time. Yeah, that's kind of how justice feels sometimes. It's necessary, but it's not satisfying the way you want it to be. The civil suit concluded 2 months later with a default judgment. Garrett never responded to the lawsuit, never hired an attorney, just ignored it completely. Attorney Brennan filed for a default judgment, and I was awarded $5,755 plus court costs and legal fees, totaling $8,200. I'd spent $1,500 on Brennan's fees, so my net gain was $6,700 on paper. Collecting it would be another matter entirely. He doesn't have any assets or income, Brennan explained, but the judgment is valid for 10 years and can be renewed. If he ever gets a job with reported income, we can garnish his wages. If your parents try to give him property or money, we can potentially intercept that. It's a long game, but you have options. I thanked him and filed the judgment away with all my other documentation from this nightmare. Garrett served his 2 months in county jail over the winter. I didn't visit him, didn't write to him, didn't acknowledge his existence. My parents sent me a Christmas card but didn't invite me to their house for the holidays. Whitney invited me to stay with her family instead, and I spent Christmas with my sister and her kids, trying to pretend my family wasn't falling apart. Garrett was released in early February and moved back in with our parents. The restitution payments of $100 per month started arriving like clockwork, probably because our father was paying them on Garrett's behalf. I deposited each check and watched the balance grow slowly, knowing it would take years to recover my full losses. In March, my parents reached out through Whitney asking if we could meet and talk. I agreed reluctantly, meeting them at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between my apartment and their house. They looked older than I remembered, worn down by months of family conflict. Lucas, we want to apologize, my mother began, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. We've been thinking a lot about what you said in your victim impact statement, about how we chose to protect Garrett instead of acknowledging the harm he caused you. My father nodded, looking uncomfortable. We've always made excuses for your brother. We thought we were helping him, being supportive, but we weren't. We were enabling him to avoid responsibility, and we hurt you in the process. I waited, unsure whether to trust this. What changed? Garrett's probation officer suggested family therapy, my mother said. We've been going for 6 weeks now. The therapist helped us see patterns we'd been blind to, how we treated you and Garrett differently, how unfair that was, how damaging. You're in therapy? I couldn't hide my surprise. All of us, even Garrett. It's part of his probation requirements. And the therapist thought it would be helpful if we all participated in some sessions together? My father leaned forward. Lucas, we can't undo what happened. We can't give you back your truck or the money you lost, but we want to try to rebuild our relationship with you, if you're willing. I thought about it, weighing my hurt and anger against the exhaustion of being estranged from my parents. I'm willing to try, but things have to change. No more expecting me to just forgive and forget when Garrett screws up. No more taking his side by default. I need to know that my feelings and my losses matter to you. They do matter, my mother said, tears streaming down her face. They've always mattered. We just lost sight of that. We're so sorry, Lucas. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon. Really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. My parents acknowledged the favoritism they'd shown Garrett, the excuses they'd made, the times they'd expected me to be the bigger person when Garrett was clearly in the wrong. They didn't ask me to reconcile with Garrett, which I appreciated. That relationship was broken in ways I wasn't sure could be repaired. But with my parents, there was hope. Fragile, tentative hope. I started attending family therapy sessions once a month. Garrett was usually there, quiet and subdued in a way I'd never seen before. Jail had changed him. Or maybe it was the probation and the mandatory alcohol treatment. Or maybe he'd finally hit bottom hard enough to want to change. We didn't talk much in therapy, but we were civil, professional even. 6 months after the accident, I bought another truck. Not as nice as the one Garrett had destroyed, but decent. A 3-year-old Toyota Tacoma with 45,000 miles that I found through a private seller. I paid $18,000 in cash using the insurance payout, the restitution payments, and money I'd saved from tax returns and overtime. It wasn't the dream truck I'd had before, but it was mine, paid for outright, and no one could take it from me. My parents came to see it the day I brought it home, and my mother actually cried. I'm so proud of you, honey. After everything you've been through, you rebuilt. I wanted to point out that I shouldn't have had to rebuild, that I'd been doing fine before Garrett destroyed everything, but I didn't. Progress was progress, and maybe this was as close to justice as I'd get. A year after the accident, Garrett got a job at a warehouse, minimum wage, but steady. He moved out of our parents' house into a shared apartment with 2 roommates. He completed his alcohol treatment program and kept his probation check-ins. The monthly restitution payments continued, sometimes from him, sometimes clearly from our father. I never fully forgave him. How could I? He'd stolen something precious and destroyed it, then lied about it, and let our parents attack me for seeking justice. but I reached a kind of peace with it. The anger faded, replaced by a sad acceptance that my brother and I would never be close. We saw each other at family gatherings and were polite, but the trust was gone, maybe permanently. My relationship with my parents improved slowly. They made efforts to treat me with the same grace and support they'd always shown Garrett. They listened when I talked about work or dating or my life, really listened, instead of waiting for their turn to talk. They apologized when they fell into old patterns, which they did occasionally, and I learned to accept those apologies. 2 years after the accident, I'd recovered most of my financial losses through the restitution payments and wage garnishment once Garrett's employment became regular. The civil judgment was satisfied, though I'd never get back the emotional cost or the time lost. I'd also gained something unexpected, clarity about my boundaries and my worth. I'd learned that choosing myself over family pressure wasn't selfish, it was necessary. I'd learned that justice wasn't always satisfying, but it was still worth pursuing. And I'd learned that sometimes the people who love you can hurt you the most, and it's okay to protect yourself from that hurt, even when they call you cruel for doing so. I still drive that Toyota Tacoma. It's got 98,000 miles on it now and runs like a dream. I've learned not to keep spare keys where anyone else can access them, and I've learned to trust my gut when something feels wrong. And I've learned that family isn't an excuse for betrayal, no matter what anyone says. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. And when that happens, the bravest thing you can do is protect yourself, even if it costs you everything. Especially then. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.